We are recording live. So welcome everyone to the only plenary of this one-day conference, which is me, which is weird because I'm running it, so it's like I'm self-promoting, but really not. I mean, last year, one of the things that people had said to me after TOPCON was that I kind of had shared some of my thoughts up front, just sort of in the opening, and they wished I would have elaborated. And so I did want to both elaborate on a few thoughts that have sort of been brewing in me, but really share with you all today a broader connection that I'm sort of ruminating, and really these are somewhat unformed thoughts in the sense of they're informed, but they are not totally formed in my head yet. But before we get to the idea of a theology of play and how it's connected to the Imago Dei, let's take a pause, and I'd like to just offer a word of prayer. God of grace and creativity and hope that we wait for in the coming season, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your spirit of play that is in each of us and in this world, and we ask that you help us to embrace that your spirit might illumine that in our minds and hearts, and that we might leave with a greater understanding of ourselves in relationship to one another and you. We pray this in the name of your Son, Christ Jesus. Amen. So just a little brief background on for those of you, I see some new faces. The theology of play is really kind of new to me. I know people have talked about it, and I've seen it in various senses, and it really never was too gripping to me. It was always more in the realm of wonder and things that I've gotten more interested in later in my life. But I've always been a player. I've always enjoyed playing games. I was never really a board gamer growing up, and that was something that I discovered in my early 30s living in Germany doing work in Bonn. I was the youth minister at the American Protestant Church there and discovered Settlers of Catan, and it rocked my world and has kind of led me through learning to lots of games and learning to how design works in games. And that led me just to like, what's happening in my mind? What's happening in this renaissance of games that we're facing right now? And I think that a lot of that actually has to do with our longing for, not for escape. I think some people will say last year at TOPCON, Ari Clark did something about how do you play games when Rome is burning, and the idea of how do you engage in frivolous behavior when and activities that are meant just to nothing more than to invite you into the play itself when the world is crashing around you. And that's never been a more important question. How do we take time in this COVID era just to pause and play? And why should we? And I would argue that we should, not only just because we're in a COVID era, but I think because it actually connects us with who we were essentially made to be. So I've been digging around. I do want to share and I'm going to put these, you don't have to write them down, but I just want to show them to you so you can see them and they're on the screen. One, if you're into board game design, and I've invited him to join us, I've emailed him a little bit, but Gabe Barrett is actually a Christian board game designer, podcaster. He lives in Central America, and he's written a couple books. He's published a couple games, and one's Kickstarter advice from all the people who do board game Kickstarters, and the other is just general advice from a bunch of designers. It's kind of like an encyclopedia of a bunch of the main designers and what they think. So very interesting if you're interested in game design as a whole. I just wanted to make sure that you see that those are available, and I believe they're on Amazon. Last year at TOPCON, I showed you a number of books, and I'm going to mention them today. And I'll leave these ones that I'm going to mention for when I do that. The interesting thing, and I'm not super thrilled with it. I'm sorry, Murray, if you actually watch this, but someone from the UK, Ellie Dix, wrote this book, The Board Game Family. It's got good information. It's not written well. Sorry, Ellie, it was a struggle to read, but it has some good information, so I continue to troll through it. This one, I think, actually is where we're seeing a gamification and culture move. This is called Locally Played, Real World Games for Stronger Places and Communities. And it's actually talking about the idea of gamification and how games function in culture and how we might use that function in culture to support our communities. And I think developing game spaces and game libraries and having that is just generally a contribution to the social environment of a community. But as Bill will testify in his workshop, and I've read in countless places that games are great for humanity in terms of all sorts of reasons. I mean, there are very few negatives that you can find in this sort of thing. And actually, I was just invited to participate in a Lilly funded grant thing about basically using game and gamification for getting people to look at capital investments and how they might actually serve in spaces of mercy and social justice. And so they're gamifying the process to teach churches how to move from taking their capital and putting it into actual social justice initiatives in their church. The other 4 books I will mention as I go because they kind of fit and exemplify some of the things that I'm going to talk about. And so I'll just dive into it. And what I would say is this is a conversation, and I've sort of scheduled this and with Q&A time, conversation time until about 1:45. We can bleed up to the Rolling Ranch game or whatever. I want to be able to have people have the freedom to have a break between stuff. So at 45, we'll make an official done. We're done. We can carry on in conversation if you like. But if you have something, don't wait till the end. Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and say, hey, Jason, and let's talk about it. Because I want this to be an interplay, because I think that's what play is. So what is play? Play is an interesting concept, and I kind of want to illustrate it. And I've been reading different people's definitions, and they range from formational to psychological to social. I mean, like regardless, of whatever background, they all sort of have a nuance on it. But there are several things that they all sort of tap into in one way or the other, and some of them exemplify that more. And so I want to give you four definitions or 4 frameworks to understand play as we understand it in relationship to who we are and what we do in our lives. First, play has an intrinsic value to it, meaning most of the things we do in life have an extrinsic value to it. It's outside of us. It's a goal at the end. A lot of us do work that we love as we're in ministry, but the person working at the Quickie Mart or the 5 and dime during the register, or whatever other job, doing the ticket booth at a parking garage, and I'm obviously picking those for example because there's a mundane, repetitive life. That would be grueling if that was a 40-hour-a-week job, and it is for some, and I recognize that. And I recognize the privilege that we come from in saying that. But the idea behind it is that they're not doing that because it gives them any fulfillment. It has an end, a paycheck. So you do something with an end in mind. We do this all, some people look at education that way. I'm going to do my undergraduate degree to get a degree in the other end so that I can do this. I'm going to go through this certification. I'm going to put in these extra hours of work so I can buy this car. We outcome base so much of our lives. And you might say that in a Christian narrative sense, the labor of this world that we're in is about outcome. When God cursed us after the fall, and the ground was cursed, and now we had to work for food. We had to have, we didn't cultivate the ground and sow the seed and grow it and harvest it and grind it and mix it and bake it because we love bread so much. That wasn't like a facet of humanity. We ended up doing that because the ground was cursed, and now we had an outcome. So it wasn't like, and it's not like COVID time where everyone's a bread baker. And everyone's like turning their ovens into, bread ovens. This is like, an end result. And games or play in general don't have extrinsic goals or outward goals, or it's not outcome based. It's internally based. It's internally focused. It's realizing its intrinsic value. So the example that one of the book talks about is, again, I think I mentioned this last year at the conference, is a kid who wants to be a lion and is running around the house and pawing at stuff. And, even my own son has done this at times. And you're like, it's kind of cute for a little bit, and then it gets annoying. And then you're like, why? And there is no reason why. It's great to be a lion and roar around the house because that aspect of play is the fulfillment in the actual participation of the activity itself. It doesn't make a difference what is on the other side or whether you have to go back to being a human. In the same way, I would say play in general is for board games. And what we do, we sit down, we're trying to win, but after the board game, unless you're a sore loser or you have a problem with competitiveness, you're not taking that with you The event was there. You were present. You were dwelling. You were embodied. You were in relationship with one another. And it was what is the ultimate sort of the epitome of where play sort of finds its expression. And so that's intrinsic value. And if you're looking, and Phil Walker Harding actually last year recommended this, and this is a book that I've leafed through, Homo Ludens. It's really just about play and culture, but the nature of that intrinsic play that plays throughout different parts of history and culture, and how it gives a real glimpse to that. Renaissance, times of Renaissance have always been about the intrinsic value of art or music or theater, but and yes, there's an end goal and a product, but the art of doing that is actually what is embraced. And then when we experience that, we embrace and participate in that spirit of play. Two, there's a sense of as if, and again, that plays into that metaphor of the playing the lion, as if you were a lion. And the animal kingdom jumps into this notion of play that is as if. We just got a Malamute puppy that's a 1 year old and is now 105 pounds or something. He's huge, but he's like always dive bombing everyone. Like if you come into the yard, he runs at you like he's about to tackle you, and he stops right before because he's learning otherwise he gets a knee in his face. But there's a sense of he just wants, and I have another dog and she hates him. He's always biting her. He's always like, just runs at her. And why? Because Malamutes were designed to take down bears. They were bred way back when to take down polar bears. So in their genetic code, they are training in this young puppy play how to do that. So cats do this. They bat around things. They dive bomb. They clawing at each other. Why? Because that's their innate ability to hunt that comes out later in life. And so they're practicing. They're playing as if they were doing that. We do the same thing too, in all sorts of ways. In children and youth ministry, we theoretically are playing as if they were going to be in adult worship, although it doesn't always work itself out that way. When we play, anything, Settlers of Catan, we're playing as if we're settling an island. Or if we play like we did, we're playing a real estate agent, and some of them are a little closer parallels than others, but there's an aspect of as if. And so that sense of as if, though, has a formative value too, because it not only trains our minds and creates patterns and rhythms and our neuro patterns that actually we rely on later in life. The same thing, if you do kung fu or something, you're training your muscles in certain rhythms. Well, in the same way as if you're training your mind to think in certain ways and certain patterns. So there's an as if play formative value. And if you're going to do anything, if you're going to read anything on the notion of as if, I think Ian Bogo's book, Play Anything. I had this last year. This has been a really great book in terms of it's nothing to do spiritual or formative, just in the sense of spirituality. But third, I think bleeding out of that, it is formative. I think it forms us as human beings. It forms the way we win and lose, and our capacity to lose. I don't care whether I win or lose a game. Why? Because I play about 10 games a week. So because I'm always playing games, there's always a chance to win. Sometimes they lose, sometimes you win. You get to the point where you just sort of really, truly embrace. You get past that point where you're only playing Monopoly once a year and you have to win it and crush everybody. But there's a formative aspect, and there's not only just a formative explicit aspect that it's in the sense of what the mechanic, and you're learning, your mind's forming around that. The nature of interaction, cooperative games are great for the reason you're forming a sense of community. You're relying on whether you're group thinking. But even in the sense of winning and losing and engagement, all of that is formative behavior. And we haven't quite tapped into that in terms of Christian formation. But what we recognize is that the tendency to play is innately in us. And that if we tap into that sense of play and creativity and wonder and all that goes in that, then we actually have the chance to use that in some sense, or embrace that as some sense of formation. And if you want to read something more about just the formative nature of it, I would recommend The Power of Play by David Elkind. He's a great socio-psychologist, has written a lot about young adult spirituality and youth spirituality, and just makes an argument strongly for the notion of play holistically in a much broader sense. And then the last one that I think that is sort of the subtext of a lot of books in terms of what play is, and they don't necessarily name it in Christian terms or with the Christian notion of joy, but I'd recommend Jürgen Moltmann's Theology of Joy as providing one of those central definition points for what play is. Now, You don't get Moltmann's true theology of play. That's like in I don't know how big a book. I've never seen one, but it's like $400 on Amazon or used bookstores. You can't find it anywhere for less than 400. So, but I've been told, and I have no proof of that, but the theology of joy, which is a very thin book and very inexpensive book, contains the essence of his theology of play. And for Moltmann, the whole point of play was joy. It's an expression, it's a participation, it's a cultivation, and joy is not only the end goal, but the result in the middle. Not the end goal, but the end result and the experience of. And I do think that if you're a gamer, I know there are moments where you're playing a game and you're just like, oh, this is fantastic, and you just have almost an inner joy. I've been playing Root a lot recently. And I don't know if it's a crazy asymmetrical game, but there are just moments where I'm playing where I'm like, I have pure joy, because it's just seeing all these things come together has been a delight. So intrinsic value, as if the formative nature of play and that it's joy and that sense of joy. And as I started thinking about that sense of joy, and this is really my bridge, I was thinking about other places where we have joy in life. And I landed back through a number of paths and walking and ruminations. And I kind of landed back with the idea of what was joy like in Sabbath? And I've taught on the doctrine of Sabbath for many years. I used it in my dissertation to understand the Taizé community. And for me, Sabbath is a place where you set aside your regular rhythms for holy rhythms, and not in the sense of perfectionism, but in the sense of these rhythms are set aside, they're set apart from the rest of the time. So we go a Sabbath week in Taizé, the rest of the year is our regular time. We set aside Sunday, and the 6 days are the rest of the time. And I think games in that same way set aside our normal life and all that it brings, and allows us to just sort of focus on this Sabbath moment where, if you will, where we're only dwelling with one another and exchanging in that way. And I'm not saying every game falls into that, but much play does in general, I'm saying. But that idea that in this creation paradise, that we were given a spirit of joy, in an experience of joy, because God was dwelling with us. And for a while, you would just say that, yeah, I think there was a spirit of play there. They weren't just walking around the garden. At some point, that would have gotten boring. I think they were playing, and they were frolicking, doing whatever. I don't know what that play looked like, but I think there was a spirit of play, because that intrinsic dwelling, being present, engaging, that all of that sense of play that is embedded in the idea of Adam and Eve, or the figures of Adam and Eve, there with God before all, and the intimacy of that relationship, the perichoresis, almost a playful or joyful dance. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, and this is the leap, and this is kind of where I'm going to land today, and then we'll talk about, we can if you have any questions or thoughts, we can talk about it, because I'm curious. Again, this is sort of formative in my own mind. I'm just sort of, forming it as we go. I started thinking about the fact that in the sixth day of creation, God created humanity, and God created humanity in God's image. So there's a plurality. We see that in the male-female creation counterpart of the story. But we say God gave us God's image and likeness. Now, most of theology will say that the likeness was the righteousness or the holiness. There was a like quality, and that like quality was a sense of separate holiness, in the sense of truly of purity, of being different or apart. And there was a likeness about humanity that we lost in the fall, or was severely damaged to this extent, depending on how you want to look at it. But the image of God is typically what we talk about in the theological world or in the church world. We bear the image of God. We're image bearers. God's image is in us. And for us Presbyterians, that was ingrained in, because Calvin had a very strong doctrine of the Imago Dei, and that it was in all people, but it was depraved. But I think that image of God is an interesting concept. And I started thinking about how theologically and historically we have defined the image of God through the last, X number of centuries. And if you start to sort of compile the list, you get things like rationality is one of the first things people say. We as human beings are rational. So there's in the image of God, it bears some sense of rationality, some sense of logic, some sense of order, the capacity to order. It bleeds into the notion of intellect. Although I think there are highly intelligent animals, I think that there's a separate notion of rationality in there. Self-reflection, Niebuhr in the last century said self-awareness is the ability to reflect upon oneself and to evaluate oneself in the moment in relationship to the other or to the environment or even and ultimately to God. But that sense of self-reflection, to be able to analyze one's own actions and thoughts, that is not something that the brute beasts of this world have or possess. So we have that uniquely, and theologians have said, well, that's a part of the Imago Dei. Relationality, and that's something that does spill into the animal kingdom, but the nature of our relationality is uniquely different because of the fact that we also part of the Imago Dei, a sense of will or choice, volition, agency. And when you put that into that relational category, all of a sudden it's not like, hey, your pheromones are drawing me to you and mine are, whatever, and there's some chemical reaction, or, like the animals in this world sustain and are fruitful and multiply in this world because of instinct, because of something that just is programmed into them. And it's sort of not that there's not randomness in there, but it is they follow a natural order. We don't. We have choice, we have volition, we have the capacity to think, and that affects that relationality. But that relationality is meant to reflect that relationship, obviously, of the Trinity. Things like concrete thinking. And the ability to do that in relationship to abstract thinking and to go back and forth between those two things. Again, we are the only, and so all of these things, and you can go down the list and you can kind of tease that out, and there are other places that have smaller, but in general, the image of God in us is looked at the capacity that makes humanity different. And it often deals with the intellect. It often deals, and creativity. It deals with the fact that we have the capacity to create. And to produce and to generate and to have something that is earthed outside of ourselves. Now, what's interesting about this, if you take all of those characteristics and you say, this is the image of God in humanity. Now I ask the question, how many of those faculties of the image of God in us do we embrace in our worship? Dramatic pause. And I'm not saying we don't. I think there's creativity expressed from leadership. I think there's engagement in the mind. I think, we're a very intellectual crowd. I think that, all the, we have to make choices. Sometimes we have to give, there's lots of things. I'm not saying that worship doesn't reflect the image of God in any way, shape, or form. But what I think is interesting is that when you play a game, in particular a board game of some sort, and varieties, obviously some are better than others, but when you play games, what do you tap into? Your abstract and concrete thinking, your capacity to make decisions based on rationality and reason and logic, self-reflection for how you're relating to the other players and how you're interacting with the board, creativity and having to come up with new solutions and strategies to solve this problem. All of these faculties that we talk about in the Imago Dei historically are birth or given rise to being birthed and being seen when we play. And I think when we play, in particular, when we play board games. So anyway, that's kind of where I've landed on the whole thing. The idea that actually there is the reason play is not only instrumental, informative, and necessary for us because it is an expression of the Imago Dei, but in that play, I think that was realized and formed and experienced in that garden experience with God. And so in the same way, when we talk about Sabbath, for Jews, the Sabbath is something that they experience a little bit of that past of the paradise lost and a little foretaste of the paradise yet to come. And I think in play, we experience a little bit of that paradise lost and the paradise yet to come. And that's all I got today. So what are you thinking? Intriguing, not intriguing, poke holes in it? I don't care.
Jason, you mentioned a couple of times how you are more fascinated with, I guess, board games more so than like video games. I know back in TOPCON, you also talked about how it can be multi-generational, and you talked about the reasons for it. Do you think you could talk about that a little bit again?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was just last week, I was speaking at the PCCCA, or the camping conference, the larger one, not the Presbyterian one. and was talking a little bit about the intergenerational nature of play. One of my other hats that I wear in my worlds are I study and research and write on intergenerational formation, how the different generations have been fragmented, and we need to bring them back together. And I think play in general, but games in particular, are a unique facet of our culture that we can use to bridge generations. And I typically will say that it is a quintessential expression of intergenerationality, because in a game, and not every game, I mean, obviously, you know, there's lots of games out there, but in a lot of games, and in games that I have experienced this in, you have an 8-year-old, and you have a 28-year-old, and you have a 48-year-old, and you have an 88-year-old, or, you know, and all of these different generations, and they're all playing Dinosaur Tea Party, and they all have a chance of winning. And so the 8-year-old can beat the 88-year-old in something, genuinely beat the 88-year-old in a way. And there's a genuine mutuality that happens in there that I don't think you see in many places in culture. You can have an adult and a child watching a movie, you know, an animated flick or something like that, and they both get enjoyment out. But even that is multi-level, because you know that Disney and Pixar and the rest of them all put that adult type humor, not adult humor, but adult humor for adults. That's what it's in there, and we enjoy that because we get the little references. But I mean, honestly, there's sexual references in Disney, you know, these animated films, and you're like, that's kind of inappropriate for a G-rated film for kids, but the kids don't get it. And so even that is not the same sense of intergenerationality. But I think games actually, even though they're coming at them in different places, but honestly, even an 8-year-old and an 88-year-old might very well be at a similar sort of cognitive processing place, because older folks, and as Bill will testify and talk about later today, older folks, they need the games to keep their brains functioning and you know, growing and changing. And I think that sometimes older folks and these younger folks under the age of 10 are about at the same strategic level. So it's a very interesting dynamic to see those happen. So, but I think you know, build a sandcastle, sure, maybe that's it, that's active, but the end result you have a sandcastle to show, and that was a good experience. But I think games, never ending supply of them, always a new opportunity to engage, always a new place for generations to intersect. So.
Hey, Jason. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As in anything, we found that you had to be selective about the games when you were doing intergenerational. We did some games that were basically reflex games, like Spot, and
Yeah.
there was something else that just didn't work because reaction times between the generations. Both sides were good humored and enjoyed the interaction, but it was like once was enough.
Yeah. And those are hard. I mean, the reality is there are games out there that do accommodate those sort of, you know, that media, like Dinosaur Tea Party was one of the ones, that was the place where I think I had the epiphany moment for me about intergenerationality in gaming. But that's a case where it doesn't, you know, Spotted actually is a difficult one, because if you can't see those cards, and if you know, and also reaction time and all that sort of stuff. So definitely it depends on, you have to choose the right games. We probably could codify them a little bit, but Brian.
So I've been playing with this idea of joy and oh gosh. Okay, so just jump into it. Like God enjoyed being with us in the Garden of Eden. We were created as joyful beings. I'm using different words. So that's a goal of God for us to be happy. But then you juxtapose that with like Matthew 25, where we're called to care for other people, right? And oftentimes that's seen as a denial. I can't have more than you, otherwise I'm less than you, so I have to give everything away, and then we all come down to a lower level. So I've just been playing with the idea that joy, and maybe this is a little, I'm going to say nihilist, that's the wrong term, where joy is okay. So the challenge is, how do you invite more people into joy in a way that takes care of the world, doesn't just isolate yourself? It was the, you know, kind of like the, you know, how can you play when Rome is burning? You know, well, can you invite people into joy in a way that lifts everybody up and takes care of each person's needs? Instead, you know what I mean? Instead of self-denial, like it's okay. And actually it's better and more attractive if we do. And that doesn't have to be board games.
No, I know. Yeah.
Just joy.
Well, and I think if you extend that idea that I mean, Karl Barth said that from an experience of Sabbath, you make a glad descent back into the world for sustained formation, and acts of mercy. So I think in the sense of Matthew 25, that we're looking at in the lectionary this week, and the heart of Matthew 25, in my opinion, to some extent, is, the sense of social justice and how we demonstrate that we're God's sheep. I think that can be realized through. I think that can be realized. What am I trying to say here? I think that can be realized through a sense of play. The social justice part of it can be in that glad descent on the 6 days of the week, and I think that when we frame, and I guess that would be the postmodern side of me that says, Sabbath ought to also be on the. So you can have. I think what it is. You can have Sabbath. I actually think communities should have Sabbath. I think that actually, if we as a North American, or just Christianity in general, if we all really took the Sabbath seriously, I think it would change the way the world views us. Because it would mean that we actually are committing to saying, this is how we're supposed to live. We're going to be in community for one day. We're going to experience one another one day. We're going to worship God. We're going to exchange our earthly rhythms for these holy rhythms for one day. But I also think that there are moments where we have Sabbath experiences or things that reflect Sabbath during the week. And I think that's where games come in. And I think there's a balancing age. I think it's just a presence. I mean, aren't we called to live our lives in community with one another? And I think games, and really on the social justice side too of it, I think games are a great way to bridge the gap between folks you're not alike. I think you could take games to a soup kitchen and sit across the table, and after people just have their meal, that you engage them. And I think those sort of things are incredible opportunities to create relationship. Because as we testified last year at TOPCON, you sit across the table and play a game with someone for an hour and a half, and you left and you have 3 new friends. Except for that guy who stabbed you in the back. You hate him for the rest of the time. Any other thoughts?
Have you read the book, Just Your Move?
Yes. I have not read it.
Maybe
I do
it's
have
Your
it on my
Move.
shelf, though.
Yeah,
What's that?
I think it's Your Move, not Just Your Move. Your Move.
I think yeah. No,
about
it's
board
on my
games.
shelf. What's that?
It's about board games, what I learned about life through board games or something like that. I can't remember the subtitle in there. We did a summer series, video series here at Northminster, encouraging people to read that book and then lifted up different board games and how they connect in there. Yeah. And I think it hits upon what you were saying. It's finding that game that we can all have that shared experience. And there's out in the game world, if you're one of these big hobbyists, whatever, Monopoly makes everyone cringe in that sense. But they lift up that, hey, if Monopoly is connecting the generations, then it's a great game, because that's serving that purpose. So what's even the Candylands or whatever, if those games, because I play games with my niece and nephew that I would never take to a convention, Candyland and Chutes and Ladders and stuff, but we still, and they're in their 20s, still laugh about how many times they sent me back and all this and this connection. And every time those stories are shared, there's this joy or laughter that comes, which my nephew one time said, I may stress out on how to build my perfect army in Star Wars X-Wing in there, but when we're done, I feel so relieved and happy. There's this mindset change that he's, and it's just, I work so hard to figure out the points and everything, and I may lose miserably or may win grand, but it's that joy of that comes in. I feel de-stressed in there, in that connection bit.
You're not playing with my granddaughter. She takes things very.
I'll play with anyone a game.
Is she quite the competitor?
But if she doesn't win, the rest of the family will suffer the rest of the day. She's not one that will drop it.
Then play cooperative games. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of great cooperative games.
Been trying to do that. Well, been trying to do that before we got locked down. We even tried playing Imhotep over Zoom. Didn't work terribly well. We only did. But
And I would say that what Bill was saying, the cooperative games would be really a good place to go. Just because I think then, that sense of winning and losing against the machine, there's a solidarity in that that develops, and most of the time those things are not too difficult to beat. But sometimes they, sometimes if you set them right, they're actually pretty challenging. So
yeah, well, we tried, what was it, Forbidden Desert?
Yeah.
The family liked that, but she does not play cooperatively.
gotcha.
She is competitive.
Well,
Yeah.
then the other suggestion I would have is a perpetual game, and there aren't many of them, but Fabled Fruit, Brian and Frick and I were just talking about that, is a game that that really goes on for like 6 months or something, because you're constantly seeing the unfolding of these cards that come out and give you actions in it. You're going through a whole deck from beginning to end. And so you don't really gauge it by every single win matters, but those wins accumulate over time. So
There's also, and I'll try to look it up later. There's a set of games, they're cooperative, but each person has a book, and which is your character in a sense. And so you read it, and so you, it's a little bit better in some of the cooperative because maybe my ability is that I'm tall. And so when I look at the picture in my book, I'm going to see everything up at a higher level versus the lower. And it's a great kids one, which you can play then remotely, because you just make sure the books get distributed to each person. You take a picture of the map in there, but they're given a special ability that is crucial into solving the mystery, versus in like a Forbidden Island or Forbidden Desert, you don't really have a special ability. It can become a solo play. Why am I playing this? But if she felt like then she was relied upon, hey, you're the one that's the tall one, or that you're the one that has great vision, or you're the one that hears. We need you when we go in this room to look for those things. She may feel that it's not totally cooperative, but that she's having to use something that's special for her.
So,
and likewise,
Sounds like it might have an application.
Oh, yeah,
to
and that's
other things.
another
What's the
great
name of
one.
that one?
Is that the dungeon? Yeah,
it's a dungeon. So
the dungeon's the better one.
Our own Phil, and they just came out with another one, Volcanic Island, but our own Phil Walker Harding and one of his friends came out with their own seeker and adventure sort of thing. And these are cooperative in the sense of you're playing against the game, and it's kind of like the click and point type thing. And they did a really great job of it, and the narratives are great. So my son and I have gone through these, and even after we went through them, we went through this one twice. He wanted to go back through again because he just enjoyed sort of trolling through the dungeon and trying to find stuff. And so highly recommend that on one-on-one or a group basis. You can play usually up 4. You can play as many players as you want. You can just sort of do it together and hear the story. So Brian.
So Marjorie, one
Yeah.
idea is if you partner, like you can play a game and just have pairs even and do things together. I mean, I don't know how old this person is in your family, but depending on that, because that might just make 2 people working together to win or lose. So it softens the blow if I'm a loser, and it increases the connection if I'm a winner. So that might be a way to kind of build relationship in your family. The other thing is that not everybody's a gamer, but I would give $1 million if I had it to the person who comes up with a book that explains how to take somebody who's not a gamer because of this and walks them into being a gamer on some level. Do you know what I mean? If somebody can play one of those, I don't know, what are those? What's that game we played that we were so embarrassed to be sitting in the same room in a hotel with these?
Oh, Cards Against Humanity.
Cards Against Humanity. Like, how do you get away from that? I mean, that's a terrible game. But if somebody loves that game, I mean, if you had a chapter on how to walk that person into being able to play Fabled Fruit or, whatever, like, man, you'd make $1 million.
If I thought you had $1 million to give me, I would try.
Like we pretend that everybody wants to play games. They don't. My wife will play because I ask her to. So anyway.
So, yeah.
So Bill, what was the name of the game? Was that a name of a game or a game type that you were suggesting?
Well, both. You'll have to give me a moment and I'll try to look it up at a break time of what the actual name of the booklets.
You just chatted to her.
The kids' version of that.
Okay, that'd be great. This is a kid who's found her niche in ice hockey.
Well, that's great. That's a good game.
Yeah, not at this point.
Another idea, maybe I'm off. Feel free to push back, Bill, Jason, or whoever. But escape rooms, because
That's what we were just saying.
yeah. Oh, did you say escape room?
Well, adventure and escape
Dungeon is?
rooms, exit rooms, they all sort of, those choose your own adventure is the
Oh, okay, it's
mechanic.
the same. You're saying that's the same genre. Okay.
Yeah. Anything, because it invites everyone to participate in it another way. But that's the thing, and that's the whole point, is that you can have an 8-year-old and an 88-year-old doing one of those adventure games or exit games, because you're all problem solving together, and you want to put it in psychological terms even more so. The Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. A child can only do this so much, but when you have other adults around them, it expands their capacity for this and actually extends their learning and formational opportunities. And that's a genuine cross, generational intersection. I want to give Lori, and we can carry on the conversation, but I want to let everyone know that at 11:45, or I guess 1:45 on Eastern Coast time, to go. But I want to give Lori, who's generously donated to award our winners with 50% off coupons. But I wanted to give her a chance to say hello and to greet you all. And then Lori, we're going to end about 11:45. And then if you all want to continue you talking about Theology Plays Down, or just hang out.
Cool.
Hi, Lori.
Well, I just wanted to say hi. Glad to see you all. I'm sorry that we are not. It's been a season of not seeing people, but except for in this manner, and I am glad that we at least have this manner of getting to see each other. It's a fun thing to even think about. I hadn't gotten to the point of even figuring out how to play games online with other than video games. So this is kind of a good stretcher for me. I'm glad that. Thanks for doing it, Jason. And I hope that we will, we're going to plan like we can do this next year and wear your mask, get your vaccine when it gets there.
That's the problem with this type of retreat, though, is you can't play games and wear masks. You can, but that's not fun.
Hopefully we will be at a point where we don't have to do that. But if we can't, we'll figure out something else to do. And
I have a Darth Vader mask.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, it's good to see your faces and have this conversation and be able to try to do something, try to figure out what to do in the middle of all this crazy stuff, because there's just crazy things going on. So,
and for those of you who don't know, Lori, she is the program director at Manuka Retreat Camp and Conference Center. Or I probably botched that conference and retreat center.
Conference Center. There you go.
There you go. Something like that. Where we had TOPCON at last year. And so we had talked about having another one this year there, and obviously COVID squelched that. We did have a question. If someone wins 2 games, do they get 50% off the extra? We'll make sure that doesn't happen.
We'll
thank
cross
you,
that bridge.
Lori, for your commitment to TOPCON, and we hope that we'll be able to gather perhaps a year from now in Portland. All right. Any final thought? Oh, let's just say if you want to check out, it's not rude. Not that it would be rude anyways. I don't really care. But if you we can carry on in conversation. We will start the next game, which is the Rolling Ranch. In 16 minutes. I'll do it like I did last time, a brief explanation. Again, this was probably one of my favorites of all of them. So if you're going to miss a game, this isn't the one to miss. So, all right. Now, if anyone wants to carry on the conversation, I'm going to stop the recording just so that we have an end.